All right, good morning. Welcome as we continue our series called Living Intentional. We've walked through a few steps the past few weeks of this intentional living kind of concept. The first week, we talked about intentional growth, about how growing in our relationship with God does not just happen. We don't wake up one day and are completely theologically at the top of our game. It doesn't happen. We have to take an intentional step in growth. We can also do that through our growth groups or through these campaigns. We also talked about intentional vision, and we shared the 2016 vision statement for Grace Community Church. We hope that you picked up one of those and you've been able to look over some of our goals. We set goals so that we can strategically measure where we are as a church for the year. Last week we talked about intentional friendships, talked about intentional relationships. And relationships and friendships, as you know, do not just happen. We have to take a step in growing in those relationships. Sometimes there's people that sit around you every single week here at church, and you don't even know their name. First thing we could do is take an intentional step in our friendships or our relationships with other people and get to know the people who sit around us at church. And so today we're going to talk about intentional leadership. Often when we talk about leadership, you automatically check out. You say, I'm not a leader, I've never led anything, I'm not going to lead anything, and therefore this does not apply to me. I'm not a leader, I'm out. I challenge you, do not check out for intentional leadership today. Because whether you want to believe it or not, you are a leader. You've got great potential to be a leader. Now, maybe you don't lead a ministry here at Grace or anywhere else. Maybe you're not the CEO of your company. You may or may not be a father or a mother, but you lead people. I promise you, you lead people. So as we start digging into intentional leadership, think about it. Who do you lead and where do you lead at? Have you ever experienced good leadership? Have you just had somebody who's a leader over you that was just fantastic? I can think of somebody. Have you ever experienced bad leadership? It's always funny. Everybody always says yes to bad leadership. It's harder to think of the good leaders. Well, I had a great leader once. He's still a great leader to me. He's a mentor and a friend. He was a former pastor of mine. His name is Tony. And he was so good of a leader to me that I still call him today and bug him almost every week. I love him. And the reason why he was a great leader to me is because he invested time with me. He listened to me. That's a hard characteristic to get sometimes, but he would listen to me. I remember I would go into his office and I would sit down and I would complain about everything. I promise you, complain about everything. And he would listen to me he was so attentive. And then he would give me the best advice. And then he didn't tell me exactly what to do. He let me figure it out for myself. And I grew so much being under a good leader. Now, I've also had bad leadership. I experienced what I would consider to be bad leadership in a place that I worked, which was a fire department at one time in my life. And we worked 24-hour shifts. Some of you know that. And 10 days a month. It doesn't seem a lot, but that's over a third of our time was spent with the people that we worked with. The station that I worked at, I spent a third of my life there. And the leadership, due to a budget crunch, decided that, hey, you know what we need to do? We need to ration toilet paper. The worst thing you should do when people live somewhere is take away their toilet paper. It's not a good idea. Morale drops big time. Even got to the point that they told us that we needed to bring our own from home. We needed to bring our own cleaning supplies from home. And we were just so discouraged. Actually, I have a pet peeve in my life. And it is that, and if you don't remember anything from this message, you will remember this, that all organizations better have good toilet paper. Because it makes a difference, I promise you. You ever been somewhere and you go in and they got one-ply toilet paper, it's just horrible? Your whole experience is ruined. But sometimes we have good leadership. And sometimes we have some really, really bad leadership. But I want to share with you today a leadership story from Joshua chapter 1, which really ties us into this being intentional with our leadership. Now, Joshua was an aide or an assistant to Moses, and most of you know who Moses was. And they were in this place wandering for 40 years. Can you imagine being in a wilderness wandering for 40 years, and you think there is never going to be any hope? But these Israelite people, that's who they were. They were promised a land that they would inherit, that it would be a land of rest, it would be a land of plentiful, and yet They were not there. 40 years. Moses was their leader at the time. And see, Moses was a good leader, but God provided Moses his leadership. If you remember, Moses actually said, I can't do this, God. I'm not capable of leading anyone. I can't talk right. But yet God told him, you can do anything with my power. You can do anything through me. And so Moses was a great leader. So Moses was this leader. He provided for them. Moses even rescued these people out of hard times. See, Moses was a loved man by his people until something didn't go well. You know, you've ever followed a leader that you love them so much, and then when things are not going well, you hate them almost. This is the kind of circumstances that they were in. Things are going well. He rescues them. The Red Sea parts. Everybody loves Moses. But as soon as they don't have any food, they don't like Moses anymore. Then God gives them manna, and everybody loves Moses. And then all of a sudden, some things happen. They don't love him anymore. He goes up on the mountain to receive commandments from God, and they had great hope. He doesn't come down as fast as they want to, so they build idols out of gold and make golden calves for idols. And all of a sudden, they don't like Moses anymore. Leadership sometimes is up and down. And that was where Moses was. Moses ended up dying, and Joshua took over as leader. See, leadership does not just happen. You have to be intentional. You have to make an intentional effort to be a good leader. People may hold a leadership position, but that does not make them a good leader. People may actually force their way into a leadership spot, but that does not make them a good leader. So I want to share with you today what makes a good leader. Think about this. Apply it to your family. Apply it to your business. Apply it to your ministry. What makes a good leader? Well, number one, leadership is preparation. Leadership is preparation. In Joshua chapter 1, the first 6 verses, it says this: After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land that I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, to all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. And then the first part of verse 6 says, be strong and courageous. See, in verse 1, we saw there that Joshua, I got Joseph on my mind today for some reason. Joshua was Moses' assistant. He was there with him. He worked with him. He followed him. Moses invested time in Joshua as a leader. And so when we look at what a leadership person looks like, Moses invested and prepared Joshua long before he got his chance to lead. See, when we learn from a great leader, we can become good leaders ourselves. But Joshua was prepared by God. He was given responsibility. I love this saying that I heard, that in responsibility, we have the ability to choose our response. See, when we're given responsibility, sometimes we don't respond very well. We may even respond in a very negative way. But when we get responsibility, we can choose to be positive. We can choose to give God the glory. We can choose great things. So when we get responsibility, we have to think deep. One of the biggest leadership mistakes, I believe, is that when we give responsibility without preparing. You know, when you tell your kid that it's time for them to drive the car, but they've never sat behind the wheel before, not a good idea. Not a good idea. So we have to prepare people. We have to equip them, and then we give them the responsibility. There's also a leadership epidemic in this world, and what it is that we tend to be afraid of making decisions. Have you ever held off on a decision because you were just scared of what the outcome would be? You didn't really have a lot of faith in what you were going to do or what you were going to say, and you just held off on that decision. That is an epidemic in our world of leadership today. Some people are discouraged in your ministry. Some people quit serving in ministry at church because it's too hard or it's too difficult or you don't have time. Some of you are discouraged in your families because it's just, life is difficult, isn't it? Or your businesses are not thriving as well as you would like them to. And so we get discouraged and we don't make a lot of great leadership decisions. And then what happens is that we put our faith in ourselves. And we do this because it's not that we refuse to do what God has told us to do. We just refuse to do. We're not willing to take the first step. God is often speaking to us and telling us to make a move, and we're too afraid at times to actually take that step. We have to have the faith that God is going to provide. Can you imagine Joshua in this time, in this context? Wow. Moses is dead. His leader, he was the follower, he was the assistant, and now he's got to take over. He's got to take over all these people that he watched. Love Moses, hate Moses. Love Moses, hate Moses. And now Joshua is the leader. See, nothing in life or in ministry ever happens apart from courage. God said, be strong and courageous, Joshua. And when you read Joshua chapter 1, you really need to take it in its emotional context. You need to say, Joshua's buddy, his friend, his leader has died. You know the emotional grief that you have experienced if you've ever lost a loved one, someone that you really, really cared about? This is Joshua. And now he has to step up and carry on. But God comes to Joshua and says, I'm going to give you a personal lesson in courage. And see, God does that to us. When we can't make that step, God comes to us and says, Jake, you have been created for a special purpose. I have a plan for your life. Take that first step. Be strong. Be courageous. See, in your notes, get this. Courage rests upon clear preparation from God. See, we don't get the courage because we've mustered it up inside because we're capable of doing it ourselves. Courage comes because God has prepared us all along the way. See, he didn't just create you with no design. He didn't create you with no purpose. He created you uniquely for maybe such a day as this, for today, to serve, to lead, to be a better father or a husband or a mother or a wife, to be a better CEO or a better employee. He's created you uniquely. See, God has given us the great responsibility to prepare others for leadership. We shared this passage of Scripture quite a bit, but in Ephesians chapter 4, let me read to you what it says in 11 through 13. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to, listen to this, to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. See, sometimes when we think things aren't happening, especially in church setting, we have to learn to equip more people. The key to engaging more people in ministry and to live out the design that God has for you and for me is to equip, to be equipped. Well, at church we say equip a lot. It sounds good. John Maxwell says it a lot, but we don't always understand what that means. And I want to share with you, how do you equip? Because you can equip your children. You can equip the people that you work with, your coworkers. I promise you can. How do you equip? Number one, you invest. You invest in people's life. You spend time with them. You listen to them as my old pastor would do. You listen attentively. You pay attention to them. You just open your door. You invest in them. You share with them what you have already learned. What you're able to share with them can take off years of bad experiences, years of errors, if they'll just listen. And the second thing that you do to equip is you empower. You invest in them and you empower them. Empowering is giving them responsibility and authority to do something. That you invest in them and you teach them and you prepare them, and then you give them the authority to do that. You don't hold over their heads and you don't micromanage them, but you give that empowerment. But one of the biggest things that we cannot do in life at all is we cannot empower without preparation. Just as God prepared Joshua, just as God prepared Moses, we cannot step out in empowerment with a lot of authority and a lot of responsibility if we have not been prepared ourselves. That's why with our growth groups and with Living Your Dash campaign, we don't want to just say, be warm and filled, here's a book, have fun. We want to prepare you. We want to give you the tools and to really equip you to be able to effectively lead a small group. Because when our campaign is over, you know what we want? For you to continue on. And when you invest in the lives of 8 to 10 people, wow, things begin to change. So maybe you've never committed to serve with the gifts that God has given you. Maybe you don't even think your importance. But I want to challenge you as we talk today. If you feel like you are ready to begin to serve in ministry, no matter what it is, wherever it may be, if you want to, on that connection card that Ben talked about, if you would fill in a blank spot, hey, I'm ready to serve. I don't know what it is, I'm ready to serve. Let's connect and let's talk about how we can begin to use the gifts that God has given you to begin serving Him for His glory. That is a great way to start. Maybe it's with the growth group. So when you equip people, when you lead people intentionally, it results in changed lives. It results in changed lives. Now, the second thing, leadership is about vision. Leadership is about vision. In Joshua chapter 1, continuing verses 6 through 8, it says this, just to reiterate, be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. He repeats, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. See, that is the point. Keep this book of the law. Sorry, go back to that, guys. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. It's like God is just wrapping His big old arms around Joshua and saying, you know what, man, it's going to be okay. You may be frightened, you may not know what you're doing, but it's going to be okay. Joshua, be strong. And God gives Joshua the big picture. He gives him the big vision. He says, you will lead these people to inherit the land that I swore to their ancestors. All the things that Joshua had heard about over and over again, this promised land, he's going to be the guy who takes it to that level. He's going to be the guy who brings them to the promised land. And so could you imagine being frightened? Could you imagine being in that place? And yet God says, here's the big picture. Here's what leadership is all about. You will be the one to lead these people. So when you recognize and think about vision, realize that it is from God. And God never calls us to do anything apart from Himself. So His direction is twofold. Be strong and be courageous and meditate on my law. Meditate on. See, when you begin, you're like, hey, I don't know how to lead. I have no idea where I'm going in life. I have no idea to control my family or to raise my children or to whatever it is. Meditate on God. Meditate on His word. Meditate, pray. Spend time with people who love Jesus beyond anything you could ever imagine. And leadership, it becomes a funnel. And all of a sudden you realize, I can do this thing. I can be the father that I need to be. I can be the husband that I need to be. Meditate on Him. Every assignment that God gives is also His primary means of growing us closer to Him. When something seems unattainable, it's probably because God is going to use that to get you closer to Him, grow you closer in your spiritual walk with Himself. That is a great way to look at leadership. You ever look back and said, this is just a horrible, horrible situation that I'm in? And at the end you go, wow, God took care of me. He provided for me. And now I'm a better and stronger person because He wants to use those opportunities to grow you closer to Himself. See, and Joshua is also not the only one that He's saying be strong to. He's saying that to the mom who's struggling as a single parent. He's saying that to the person whose bank account is absolutely empty and they don't know how they're going to feed themselves or their children. He's saying that to everybody who has never set foot in any kind of leadership role, but you're ready and He's calling you. He's saying to you today, be strong, be courageous. The courage that He gives is just assurance of His preparation. When He gives you that courage, He's saying, I'm with you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. If He called you, He is with you. So something that I heard that absolutely changed my life is this. Don't ask for tasks that are equal to your powers. Ask for powers that are equal to the tasks. When you have something in front of you, don't say, I can only do what I'm capable of doing. When you have this great task, you say, God, give me the ability and the capability to do it. With God, leadership is intentional. So as you're growing in your leadership and your intentionality with leadership in 2016, I want to give you 3 quick principles that if you will apply, you will see accomplishment. Number 1, define your priorities. Figure out what is most important to you. Don't waste your time doing a lot of stuff just to be doing stuff. This is going to sound really counterintuitive to church sometimes. Don't do every ministry just because it sounds good. Do what God is calling you to do so that you can be most effective and you can help lead other people to Christ. Define what is most important to you. Number 2, establish a plan. See what's most important to you, write it out. Establish the plan. What does it look like? Hey, guess what? It is okay to dream. You don't have to be stuck in reality all the time. It is okay to dream. Establish a plan with some dreams on it. It'll help you moving forward. And number 3, which to me is the most important, make it personal. Own that plan. Own those assignments. Own those priorities. Realize that God is putting you in a place for a very specific reason, and you make it personal. See, usually the only time that we make things personal is when there's a crisis. You ever experienced that? Things go really, really bad. All of a sudden we step up, we start making decisions, we lead, we do things. And the only reason why we're doing that is because there's a crisis. My challenge to all leaders is don't let crisis leadership be the direction of how you focus. Leadership in crisis cannot be the only way that you lead. You must lead strong from the beginning. And so people step up to the plate when crisis comes. So leadership is about preparation that comes from God. Leadership is about vision that comes from God. And number 3, leadership is about influence. Leadership is about influence. It is about the influence that God gives you so that you can share with other people. Joshua 1 starting in verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go and to take the possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. See, I don't know if you ever heard it, and I'm sure you probably have because Pastor Rick shares it all the time, but John Maxwell said, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. We influence people. We influence people. We have the ability to do that. Did you realize scientists say that the most introverted person, you may believe that you're the most introverted person in the world, but the most introverted person in their lifetime will influence over 10,000 people. If you think you're introverted, you will influence over 10,000 people in your lifetime. So the question isn't, will you influence people? The question is, how will you influence them? How will you spend your time? Leadership doesn't happen by mistake. So if leadership is intentional, and leadership is influence, and leadership is about preparation, and leadership is vision, what are you going to do about it? See, in this passage, God influences Joshua, and Joshua influences his people. He says, get ready. Take responsibility. Moses was intentional with Joshua, therefore Joshua was able to lead. So what are you going to do to pass it on? See, with Moses, listen to this. With Moses, you may have done all the work. You may have walked all the miles, but it may be the next generation that crosses the finish line. That's really hard sometimes for us to grasp because we've spent a lot of money, we've spent a lot of time building things in our life. But it may be somebody else who actually takes the team or takes the people that you lead through to the next phase. And you know what? As a leader, as a person, we need to learn to be okay with that. It is okay if maybe you were a part of this church when it was founded, but there's going to be other people take it on to greater and bigger things. But you have invested your time in those people. And for the reason, God is going to bless beyond belief. So we don't do it ourselves. It must be about God. See, leadership is vanity if it is not done for the glory of God. Now, if you read on in the whole book of Joshua, it's 24 chapters, but then you go to the next book of Judges in chapter 1 and then chapter 2. In verse 10, it actually says that after all of these people who had passed away, all of these people who knew and followed God and loved God and was great leaders, after they all passed away, the next generation forgot about God. The next generation forgot about God. They did wonderful things, amazing things. But they did not invest, they did not equip properly. And therefore, that next generation, instead of not doing great in leadership, they totally forgot about God. So what are you as an individual doing to pass it on to somebody else? Everybody's job, I believe, is to equip somebody else. Share God with somebody. Share the message of Christ with somebody. Spend time with them. Invest your life in them and empower them to do great things. I had a professor once in seminary, and he authored a book, and it was a life-changing book for me. It was called Follower First. The theory behind it blew my mind, but it was so simple. In order to be a great leader, you must first be a follower. And when we say that, we often think, well, I must be an employee, or I must work for somebody. That's not what he's referring to. In order to be a great leader, just as Joshua, just as Moses, we must first be a follower of Jesus. We must first put our trust and our faith and our hope in Jesus. And then when God comes to us and shakes us on the shoulders and say, be strong, be courageous, I've got this for you. You're in my hands. All of a sudden, you're able to take steps of faith you were never able to take before. You're able to do great and mighty things that you thought you would never do before. You might be influencing more than 10,000 people in your life, but it all starts with giving your life to Jesus and trusting in him as your Savior, and not just taking one little step at a time with him, but being intentional in your growth and saying, God, I love you. Being intentional with your vision and what you see God doing and what is he speaking to you. Being intentional with the relationships that we have around us, the people that God has already put right beside you. Being intentional with the opportunities we have to lead and to serve. And then, as we'll talk about next week, being intentional with the mission that God has for us. So you have great responsibility to equip the next generation. Now, one of the things that I want to share with you as we close is just to say that we want to provide an opportunity for you to grow as a leader. Maybe you know every single thing about leadership. We need to spend some time together. But I want to provide an opportunity for you to grow as a leader, whether that is in business or family or in ministry. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is starting in April the 4th, we're going to launch something called Leadership Crossing here at Grace. And what it is going to be is a year-long leadership development process. Some of you just took big gasps of air right there and just said, oh, a year? It's broken down into 3 phases, and they're smaller phases. And I'm just asking everybody that if you feel called by God to lead, you're ready to take a step, whether you're a leader now, you're ready to be a leader, you want to become a better husband, father, friend, whatever it is, be a better employee, better person, boss, or manager at work, take the step of Leadership Crossing. Cross over to the potential that God already has for you and join us through this journey. Commit to me for at least the first phase, which is 2 months long. Almost anybody can do that. With a commitment of 1 hour a week. That's what I'm asking for. And so if you think, you know what? This is my time. I'm ready to rise up to leadership. I want to learn more. I want to grow more. Leadership Crossing is for you. So when we leave in just a moment, if you go to the lobby, I have some of our 301 team is going to be out there. And they've got a table set up. And they've got some brochures for you, lay out all the information. They've got a card. Maybe you want to commit to signing up and being a part of this process with us. You can also take that card and say, you know what, I want to pray about it a little longer. But you go out there and you meet them and you talk to them and just see what's going on. Did you realize this? Based on a study from the Brandon Group, 77% of organizations say that their leadership strategy is not aligned with their goals. You may actually think that at your own work. 71% of organizations say their leaders are not ready to lead into the future. But yet 83% of organizations say that development of all leaders is very, very important. So there's a great leader hidden within all of us. You are uniquely designed to lead. So would you step up and rise to the challenge? Be intentional with your leadership. Be intentional as a friend. Be intentional with your vision that God gives you. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you for the love that you give and the promises that you provide for us. God, I'm grateful that you give us the opportunity to lead. Lord, just as with Joshua, you You did not just say, Joshua, go out and have fun at this. You equipped him. You provided for him through Moses and through the power of your Spirit. Lord, would you help us as we move forward in our own lives as leaders, as mothers and fathers and friends and husbands and wives? Would you help us to grasp the preparation that you have for us and to understand that you have a bigger vision for us? And Lord, that we have the ability to influence people. Lord, I pray for the person here that is challenged with the idea of joining us through Leadership Crossing, through this developmental process that we can walk together. Lord, I pray for that individual. And Lord, I pray for the person that is struggling here, that does not have a personal relationship with you. Lord, would you touch their heart? And Lord, would you let them realize that it is a complex thing, as Ben said, but God, it's so simple. That we put our trust in Jesus Christ, that he died on a cross for us, shed his blood, was raised from the grave by your power, so that we may have life with you forever. For that individual that's struggling with that, Lord, would you give them the strength to call upon your name, that they might be saved. Lord, thank you for the opportunity that we have to worship, that we can give you it all. Lord, as we are as intentional through this series about the things that we believe are important to share with this church and this community, would you help us in our personal lives to take the next step of faith through courage and strength that you provide. In Jesus' name.